Hey, and we're live. Hello, everyone. So my name is Kent C. Dodds, and I'm here talking with Pia about OpenCollect. OpenCollect is this really interesting new way to fund a lot of things, but open source is the thing that I'm particularly interested in. And so, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and OpenCollect?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Argentina originally, just in case you were wondering where the the funny accent is coming from. And I studied Open Collective with two friends, Xavier Daman and Asim Sud, less than a year ago. It's going to be a year pretty soon, February last year. And the goal was to enable groups of people that have a shared purpose, a shared mission, to raise funds or to pull money from backers or sponsors without needing to have a legal entity or a bank account. Essentially, what we're seeing was that there's like this completely sort of online communities are very out of sync with what our governments are requesting from them to be able to receive money. So an open source project is like the first obvious one, right? Groups of people that might or might not have ever met from different countries doing something that it's open, that it's clearly a public good, and that a lot of people are getting a lot of value from it, but they can't receive any funding because they can't do it as a group, right? Or they need to use someone's bank account, like one of the maintainers' bank account, which is obviously has issues with transparency and trust and tax implications for the person putting up his bank account to receive the money. So we set out to solve this problem, and the way we're doing it is we created Open Collective. It's a platform where the open collectives have a public page, a dedicated page to receive funding from backers or sponsors. We can go into the difference in a little bit, using Stripe. And then there's a host organization that may or may not be Open Collective that receives the money for them and then pays or reimburses expenses for these groups. So, for example, most of the open source projects are hosted on Open Collective on us, but the Ruby projects are hosted, for example, on Ruby Together. So it's Ruby Together, the organization that receives the funding for the Ruby open source projects. Docker is funding all the Docker meetups. So meetups around the world from Docker receive funding from different sort of members or backers. And the money goes to Docker, and then Docker does the reimbursement. So it's a way of removing the friction for online communities to have to create a legal entity, to have a conversation about who's the president or who's the director, and it's very cumbersome. It's like we shouldn't be paying this price so early in the game.
Oh yeah, so that's really interesting. So my brain is flooded with questions about how things work. So you have this concept of collectives, and then there's like things within a collective, right? So Webpack being an example, that's part of the open source collective, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So what we did was, with open source projects in particular, we sort of bundle them on the open source collective. The reason we do that is because there's a lot of resources that can be sort of federated, if you want, or mutualized for all the projects to enjoy. So we have donors that give like larger amounts of money at the open source collective level, and then we distribute. That makes it easier for companies to give the funding, because they just do it once a year, or make a wire transfer that then we manually add, instead of having to put their credit card into each of the collectives, which might be a problem for them. We also have deals with companies that want to support all the open source projects. So, for example, they give free office hour space for everyone on the open source collective, and things like that. So the idea is to sort of mutualize resources and make it easier for open source projects to be sustainable.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So like the only thing that those open source projects aren't like sharing funds or anything, they're just sharing the collective, they're sharing like what entity it is that actually holds and distributes the money, that kind of thing?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. So and then, for example, we also have we are also building another collective. We call them super collectives. It's the Internet Freedom Collective. So all the projects related to internet freedom software are going to be also bundled again together into this sort of larger umbrella. And so organizations like the Open Technology Fund are able to provide workshops to everyone who belongs to the internet freedom. And then you could have yourself, for example, as an individual, someone with many different projects, you could also create a collective for you where all the different projects that you have are bundled together. So people can choose to give you at that level or can choose to back any separate project. The idea here is always to make it easier for backers to give support to open source projects, to enable open source projects to find creative ways of being sustainable for the future.
Okay, cool. So like, do you have any companies or people who are backing like the open source collective in general, not like specific project, but the whole collective?
Yep, we do. We have backers, individual backers, and we also have companies like iDoneThis, for example. They give money regularly to the open source collective, and then we distribute to, we either use that money, for example, to get stickers for the collectives or the projects, or we just distribute the money among the projects that they are interested in supporting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they're backing the collective as a whole and not any particular project, how do you distribute that money? Is it like evenly distributed among the projects?
It depends on the company. It depends on who's the sponsor. So for example, someone like Auth0, they don't do it, but they could say, I'm just going to give to the open source collective, and then you distribute equally amongst every collective that has authentication, that's working on authentication. And then that's it. We just distribute like that. So it really depends on the kind of the interest of the company.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So for the use case that I was thinking about, so right now, I see people giving money as a way to say thank you. Like the best, I think one of the best ways to say thank you to an open source project is to contribute back to the community or to the code or to the tests or to the documentation, do something like that. But not everybody's able to do that for one reason or another. They might not have time or might not have the skills yet or something like that. And so having an option for people to contribute money is just like giving them an opportunity to like say thank you and also feel connected to that project and to that community and to give back. And so for that reason, I have a donate badge on most of my repos where it'll just go to like a paypal.me for myself and they can give me like $2 or something. So anyway, the kind of the use case I was thinking about was using Open Collective for all of my projects. So my question is, how easy would it be to like set up something like that? And then let's say I have somebody who's contributing a lot to one of the projects that I have on there. Like, how easy would it be for me to like distribute some money to that person?
So you have two options, the way I see it. One is to create, and both are equally easy. Like it's actually quite easy to create a collective. I can do it in like a second. Well, no, maybe two. But
Nice.
So we can either create one page for each of your projects. Say you have 10 different workshops or 10 different repos that you're working on, right? So we can create collective per repo. So each repo, it's going to have the dedicated public page like Webpack, exactly the same, right? You're going to have the same page with the options to give money to that sort of project in particular, to that repo in particular. And then all of them are going to be bundled C-Dots collective, right? So someone can say like, look, I just want to support you because I just like what you do. I don't care for, you know, what repo. I just want you to keep doing what you do, and you make the decisions about what repo you're gonna put more time in, because you know how it works and da da da. So I'm just gonna give you at that level. I'm just gonna make $100 per month donation or something like that.
That would be amazing. I don't expect anybody to do that.
Well, awesome. You'd be surprised. Like that, you'd be surprised. But so yeah, so that those are the options, and it's if you, and then to your second question, so the second option is to say like, no, I'm just going to create a collective for myself. I'm just going to list all the repos, just list them and with links, you know, using Markdown, and then I'm just going to ask people to just support me, and then I'll choose how much work I put into each of these repos. So in that case, you would have only one dedicated page, and people are going to just back you as a person. So that's another option that you can do. No. Should I continue with this?
Let's say I did that second option you said. So I just have a list, and then one of my projects starts to like, I have a project called Angular Formally. I haven't worked on it in a while, but I'm just trying to, like, I'll go back in time a little bit when I was working on it quite a bit. And it wasn't like, it has its own organization and it had quite a few contributors. Let's say that I have another project like that starts like getting that popularity and that many contributors. Would I like make that its own collective itself, or like could I combine it with mine somehow? Or like I'm just trying to think of what's the best way to make sure that there's transparency in the contributors getting the funding for their contributions, and making certain that it's like, yeah, sure, maybe Angular Formally I'm like doing it the most, but it's not really part of my collective because it's more of like there are more contributors than just me. It's kind of like the idea of how, like, on github.com/KentCDodd/project name, and once it starts getting a lot of people contributing, it starts to make more sense to move it from the Kent C. Dodds to something that's more of an organization. So do you have like a transition strategy like for something like that?
See, the transition strategy is to create a collective with that name separate from you. So you could either host it yourself in the sense that the money can go to you. So everything that happens in the platform is transparent. So even if we have individuals hosting their own collective, so even if you decided to do that, it would be very clear how much money you have for the collective, who's giving you that money, and how you're spending that money, right? So you could decide to host the collectives, or, you know, all of your projects, or even if you spin off a project by itself, you can either decide to host it, or you can host it on Open Collective. Like it's host in the sense of who's receiving the money. So that's very easy to do. And the reason why we created Open Collective was for things like that. If you decide to do a 501c3 or an LLC or whatever to do this and receive money to have like an organization, it would be a nightmare to spin off a new one, because you wouldn't be able to say like, look guys, this is not me anymore, I'm doing something else, it's more on you, I'm not a core maintainer anymore, so I just want to give you the project and just keep working on it, right? That doesn't happen like that with the sort of in our legacy system. It's very cumbersome. It's really hard to shut down an organization, to open, you know, it's easier to open a new one than shut down one or transition to another team or anything like that. So the idea of Open Collective is to allow for these projects to go beyond the person itself. And this is a perfect example. You created a project, it's growing a lot, you have a lot of people, suddenly those, you know, new contributors are contributing more than what you're doing. We add contributors, and that's it. It's cool. Like it's super easy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think that we need that sort of fluidity, we need that flexibility in order for this to thrive, and sort of give to society everything that they can give. If not, it's like we're, you know, tying our hands. And I think that sort of this community, especially open source projects, when you think of them as a collective, when you think of them and they suddenly have a yearly budget, they suddenly have a way of, from people, like a healthy way for maintainers to leave the project without the project dying, things like that. I think that's I give to to this space. And then towards your second question about how you give them money, people can submit expenses to your collective. So in the cases that we were talking about, the two cases before, if you have collective per repo, and then they're all bundled in your Kenzie.super collective, but each has its own individual page, then it's easier for maintainers. It wouldn't be much of a difference, but it would be easier to have, or each contributor to each dedicated repo submitting an expense to that page instead of to you. I think it'd be easier to manage. I would encourage you to do it like this if you're going to be paying other people. So the way they do it is they submit an expense or an invoice for their hours worked, and then you just reimburse them at the moment using PayPal. But we can use other in the future.
I'm good with PayPal.
Yeah, no, I know.
Nice. Okay, so what kind of expenses do you see people submitting? Is it just like, hey, I worked 3 hours, could I get like $20 or something like that?
Yeah, so normally each open source project has its own sort of way of doing things. So Webpack, for example, has a very way of distributing funds. They have like an amount per the contribution transforms into points, and those points can be transformed into money or into points, voting rights on their app to make decisions. So it's very clear, and so how much they can submit. So that's one way of doing it, like the contributors submit an invoice for their hours work or a percentage of the feature that they contributed to, etc. I would suggest to make this as clear as possible from the beginning. I think Webpack is doing it very well because it's very clear how it transforms into how much it goes into money and how much it goes into points, and then when they have more money, they're going to be able to have more. And then some contributors are saying, I'm okay with the money, I prefer 100% on points, whatever, but it's very clear, and I think that's very important, because one of the things we learned since we started working on Open Collective is it's very hairy sometimes to talk about money in these communities that are doing voluntary work, essentially. And we have a kind of a weird relationship with money. It's, a lot of projects are embarrassed of asking for money, or they don't know how to spend it, or there's like this sort of, trying to keep this undercover or things like that, right? So what we try to do is to make everything very transparent, and to say, like, guys, money is just another resource. You can, just use it to, go towards your community, use it to buy stickers. So some projects submit expenses for stickers or for swag or for, I don't know, flying someone to a meetup, for example, right? And things like that. So some projects that are maintained by one person, that person just submits invoices for all the funds that they receive monthly. So that's also something they do. I've seen expenses for logos, for websites, for design, like specific, design for things, for podcast mics, things like that. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, I actually really like that idea of like using the money to make the project better, like the logo and the website and that kind of thing. While I appreciate opening up an opportunity for people to contribute money, I kind of feel uncomfortable taking that money as like, I don't need it, honestly, and mm-hmm. I'm doing this just not because of the money at all. And so using the money to make the project better, it seems like a pretty solid way to do things.
Also, I think that we need to again, what we strive to do is to help projects have a healthier relationship with money. So until now, I think that the framework for sustaining open source, it's the charity kind of framework, and I don't like that, right? That I'm just gonna give money because it's just in the same way that I give money to ACLU, I give money to an open source project. And I think that we need to shift that. I think that it's what we try to do is to move away from the charity framework to a framework where you're actually giving people something in return as well, that fund. So something that we are exploring with Webpack is doing office hours. So the core team is separating a couple of hours per month to have one-on-one call with their bigger sponsors, for example. And for the companies that are using Webpack, that's, a lot. It's huge, right? And I'm not talking about the Spotify or PayPal's of the world, but like the smaller company that uses Webpack that doesn't have a huge engineering team, that having the opportunity to support an open source project and then get a little bit of access, it's huge. Shifting that idea that I'm just going to give to open source because I have some excess budget at the end of the year to I'm actually it's a relationship where I'm getting something in return as well as a sponsor. So even if you personally don't need the money, I think that starting to walk this road of sustaining open source in a real long-term way, I think is very important. So if you want to use the money to pay for better things for your projects, I think it's amazing. But I would still encourage you to go through something like Open Collective or any other platform. It doesn't have to be Open Collective, but I mean, sustaining open source and using money to support open source projects.
Yeah, actually, that's something else that I wanted to touch on, which is there are some projects that are like really, really impactful and really widely used, but they're and they're like really important to the community, but they're not well recognized because there are other projects that are built on top of them, and then projects built on top of that, and those are the ones that people know about and use. So is there any do you have any ideas of how to support those like more fundamental pieces that are like really critical, but people don't really maybe know about them as much?
So one way is it's I think it's creating like some sort of using this more the hottest open source projects or the ones that are built on the top as relays. So they would receive the money that they as a group can decide to turn around and support one of these smaller projects or more sort of base projects or infrastructure kind of projects that are less well known, but they're extremely important. So that's and I think I can't remember exactly the collective. I want to say it's JS, but I'm not sure. That all the funds that they're raising, they want them. They don't want them themselves. They want them to either go to charity or to go to another smaller project. So that's a way of doing it, and so it creates this sort of virtuous circle of support.
Okay, cool. So like if I had a collective of a project that like maybe I have a project that is widely used, but like pretty much I'm just wrapping another thing that is really useful. Could I take my collective and just say, just funnel this money off to this other collective that may not be as widely known? That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's consensus in the regional collective that's what's happening, yeah, that's easy, very easy to do.
Very cool. It seems to me like we need to get collectives for every open source project. So this is easy to do.
Well, there you go. I'm not complaining. I think it's a great way to have a healthier sort of, in general, not just for the big projects, but for everyone. And we need the sort of hottest, the biggest projects to attract and sponsors to create that sort of base of people that are, that understand how it works and that support some projects, and then slowly move them to other sort of maybe less well-known, equally important projects.
Yeah, I like that. That seems like a pretty good strategy to me. Cool. So there are two other things that are on the top of my head that I wanted to ask about. And with Open Collective, you can, as a supporter, you can have like a monthly donation, and you can also do one-time payments. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, and this is using Stripe. So you can enter your credit card information and it'll charge it every month or just the one time?
Yep. that's correct. Or you can do yearly as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so the way we organize it, and each collective can actually sort of tweak this, but the idea is that backers, it's a category thought for, starts at $2 per month, and then sponsors is a category that we thought for companies, but that also individuals that are giving a lot of money to collectives personally, that starts at $100 per month. And then that's it. But you could tweak it. You could say like the super collective, or this project is super hot, so we're gonna have sponsor level started at 500, or because we're giving office hours, so sponsor level starts at 1500. I don't know, whatever you want. It's like, yeah.
Okay, so that actually makes me think of what you just said. Makes me think of like maybe some of the competing factors to something like Patreon, where it's not so much like you can do some open source things, but it's mostly like you're supporting an individual person. But like, let's say this isn't something that I'm really planning on doing, but let's say I wanted to do some consulting on the side. Could I use Open Collective, like have an Open Collective for my consulting and say, hey, if you sponsor me for $500 a month, then I'll be available to answer your questions or whatever. Is that something that would make sense?
Yeah, it would. So we don't have a lot of individuals. Like I think the only one is me, because and it's not for consultancy, but I received a grant from Shuttleworth Foundation to work on Open Collective. They just called me one day and they said, like, we like what you do. We want to give you $5,000, just whatever way you want, but it's just for you to be able to work more on Open Collective. Cool. So what? Yeah, no, they're amazing. And so what I did is I opened a collective for myself, and then sort of added those $5,000. And then I'm submitting expenses against that money. So it's just a way of doing with the grant. But there's also an option to support me individually as well there. So if you would like donate money, you can do that, and then I'll show how I'm using it. So it's definitely an option. It's not something that we've experimented much with, but yeah.
So actually, on those reimbursements, like if I had something like that, would I be saying, hey, I want to buy, like, I don't know, an HDMI cable, and so I'm going to reimburse that. Like, do you do that fine-grained type reimbursements, or you just say, okay, I just want to get all the money and I'm going to use it, just like put it in my regular pot of money? Like, how are reimbursements supposed to work with Open Collective?
It works with, it's supposed to work. We reimburse either hours worked, so invoice for your hours, like if you were a freelancer or a contractor, or an expense that you either paid for or your vendor submits to your collective. So if you hire someone to do t-shirts because you want to send t-shirts to everyone that backed you, or someone to do your logo, that designer just submits the expense to your collective, and then you pay him through there. You can't really submit your rent or those kind of rent it's a very complicated one. So that we wouldn't allow for that. It has to be sort of expenses that are related to the activities of the collective. So in my own case, for example, I submit all my plane tickets to New York when we do sprints for Open Collective there. I submit the office hours, the co-working space that I use, and things like that have to do with Open Collective.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, and that seems right to me. So let's say that I start an open source collective for a project, and then I get to the point of the project where it's pretty much done. There's not like a whole bunch more to do, but it's such a useful project that people keep contributing to it that it, like, I don't have anything to work on. Like it's a finished project. How would I get that money out? Like, what would I use that money for?
Again, you would either have to submit expenses, maybe that you are working on a different project, but it's related to that, for example, or you can choose to support other collectives as well, or you can choose to support a charity. You can choose to donate that money, or use it to pay for, again, swag, things like that you can send to those contributors, or pay for the people that are, or again, hours, of consultancy on that project or things like that. But it's an interesting one. We haven't had that case yet, and I'd love to. It's a happy problem. Yeah. They give money to other open source projects that are not as lucky.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, cool. Yeah, we'll see what happens when something like that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Just happy problems. But so yeah, with the expenses, I think it's recorded and transparent. So it's quite easy to manage. But there is a restriction into what you can expense money for, in terms of because we have to, the host organization needs to report here. So so all the friction that we remove from everyone else, like the hosts absorb it, and that's why they charge a fee. They do the bookkeeping, they pay taxes if they have to. They manage that the expenses are related to the activities of the project, because most of them will be fiscal sponsors, right? So they are like charity status it's at risk as well. If so there's like a vetting process for expenses.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So like it would be kind of fishy for the IRS if somebody just started taking money and using it to buy a yacht or something like that.
That wouldn't be able to happen. The only way of taking money off Open Collective is doing it through submitting an expense, and that has a vetting process that it's by the host organization.
Cool. Yeah, that seems legit. Good stuff. So my last one was about JavaScript Error. That's a podcast that I did last year. That was super awesome, and I had a ton of fun, and it got pretty good viewership. But I finally decided to stop doing it just because it took a lot of time. Lots of it was dealing with sponsorships and setting up the shows and that kind of thing. If I were to do it again, I think that instead of sponsorships, I would try and use Open Collective. Can you tell me about any ideas around supporting a podcast? Is anybody doing that right now, or do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have it's not podcast, but it's an interview series called Between the Wires. And so they're a collective. They're an open collective, and they use the funding to rent the mic that they used or the camera that they use on the interviews. They pay the invoices of the copywriter that helps them edit the content. So it works like all collectives the same way. I think that you hit something there when you said about how hard it is to manage and sponsors, and that's so 2017. What we are trying to do is to find ways of enabling collectives to be more sustainable by making it easier for them to do things like that. So if you use Open Collective, you wouldn't have to worry about if they send you or not the money, and if you're going to be charging them monthly. They just put the credit card. Just happens monthly. You see it. It's already on the website. It's like it's really easy. And what we're building now is a feature for events, where for more oriented towards Meetup, but the concept is the same. That they're going to be able to sell tickets to meetups and things like that, and all of that goes to their Open Collective. And but selling a ticket is the same as selling an office hour slot or selling a sponsorship slot for a podcast. I think someone says like, oh, I'm just going to give you once this month. That means that they're the sponsor for this month's podcast or whatever. So the goal of Open Collective is to keep growing towards enabling as much as we can collectives manage all of funding and sponsorship and anything that they set out to do to be sustainable.
Okay, yeah, I love it. If I do JavaScript Error again, I think I'll use Open Collective.
Yeah, sounds good.
Make that happen. Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask about or mention? I think I had all my questions answered.
No, so mainly the way to create a collective is just open source, opencollective.com/create, and then that, you can just choose your repo from GitHub, onboard your maintainers is super easy. And the other thing is that we are open source. So if you want to just go to github.com/opencollective and have a look there, we have a bunch of issues that we're working on. Anyone who wants to give a hand, it'd be greatly appreciated. We have a very, very small team.
Cool. Yeah, I saw that there's actually right now a problem with Webpack. They have too many supporters.
Contributors, yeah, they're breaking us. I know. Yeah, just on Safari though, like it's yeah, we're having an issue loading all their contributors on Safari. So we don't really know what's the best solution. So if you want to go there, it's the last issue that it's up on GitHub.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks so much, Pia. I really appreciate you chatting with me, and I love what you're doing. So keep it up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your interest.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.